بالكم. Okay. طيب نبدأ إن شاء الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. أما بعد. So, alhamdulillah, today is just going to be a brief introduction as to what is to come in terms of what we're going to start studying. The way I was going to... No, this will be intro. I'll put this on the thing here. The actual class will start from next week. Inshallah. So, inshallah ta'ala, just an introduction to the class. Will start properly from next week, Tuesday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., inshallah, studying Fiqh of Worship. So today we'll mention some benefits in terms of what we're going to study, the kind of things to bear in mind, some of the terminologies that will be used to be understood, inshallah ta'ala, as we go through this book. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu salam rasulillah. The actual book that we're going to study is called Bidayat al-Abid. Naam, wa Kifayat al-Zahid. Now, this book, this is a version that you can actually buy that is translated into English via Amazon. If you just type in Bidayat al-Abid as it's written here, then you'll be able to purchase this actual copy of the book from Amazon, because Amazon is the one who actually prints it out. And it's a translation that contains both the Arabic and the English text. That will be the book that we will be studying. Now, in terms of the approach of how we will study this book, in general, we are studying fiqh to understand the masail, the things that are discussed at a beginner's level. To discuss it at a beginner's level. Not for us to think that we can give fatwa, to derive rulings. We're not of that level. We're studying it for us to understand what are the topics that are discussed in the books of fiqh as a basis, and then you develop upon this. Inshallah ta'ala, if there's time, we will try to touch on some of the history behind the madhahib of fiqh, the different schools of jurisprudence, of Islamic law and legislation. Now, this book is a book on the Hanbali madhab. However, what we're going to study the book not for you to act upon the madhab. When we're studying the book of fiqh, what is our objective? That we act upon the evidence. So within all of the masail that I mentioned, the different topics that are mentioned within the book, inshallah ta'ala, I will gather as much evidence as I can regarding matters discussed within that topic. In terms of what we're going to study the fiqh of ibadah, the fiqh of the acts of worship. As for mu'amalat, then maybe inshallah ta'ala after we do this we'll continue. But the main objective, this book covers the fiqh of ibadat, acts of worship. So I will start off by talking about matters pertaining to Taharah. The first thing that you'll study is Taharah, because that's miftah as-salah. That is the key to the salah. So there's no salah biduni Taharah. So the first thing that we discuss is Taharah. So inshallah we'll mention from what is mentioned in the book as the matan, as a text, and we'll come with more evidence that we can derive some things that we can act upon. If there's a need to mention contemporary issues in relation to each of the topics, then I will do so bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Also, if you have questions that are fiqh related questions, I would prefer that you do not ask in the class, and you write the question down, and I will answer that question in the next lesson. I will answer the question in the next lesson. Why is that? Because I'm not a person of fatwa. I'm not a mufti. So when you have a question, I will do due diligence in researching the answer, contacting people of knowledge if needs be, looking at what the people of knowledge have said on that issue, and then come back to you with whatever is mentioned, without giving you a personal opinion, because I'm not qualified to do that. So I also want you to bear that in mind when you ask the questions, inshallah. Also, the sisters who are watching the lesson and participating on site, you can write your questions down. At the end of the lesson, I'll collect the questions from you. If there are those who have questions outside of the lesson, who are not here and they're watching from the live, then you can email imam@croydonict.com. Inshallah, to email your question.
If we have questions pertaining to what you're just covering at the time, do we save it to the end or?
Yeah, at the end of the lesson.
Okay.
Of the actual lesson that I'm talking about in the lesson, you can ask at the end of the lesson.
Okay.
But fiqh, any rules and stuff, that's going to be written down. But as for anything I talk about in the lesson, you can ask about that, inshallah. Okay? And remember, the approach of our studying is just for us to understand the masail. And we'll try to have questions in terms of like quizzes to make sure we understand what we're studying, inshallah. Okay? And when there's any fusha, when there's the ability to do so, a form of scenario to look at, there's a scenario and apply what we learn, inshallah ta'ala, based on what we learn. Now, it doesn't mean that what we're studying is the most correct opinion. We're studying the book. So you understand, we're studying the book. Okay? And we'll study the evidences to give you a basis of the things that are discussed and mentioned. That inshallah ta'ala, as we progress, that's when we do further research and understand differences of opinion. For now, we're not entering into difference of opinion. We're only mentioning what does the opinion mention in the book. That doesn't mean that that's the opinion I follow. That's the opinion the author mentions in the book. Now, the reason why we have chosen this book is because it's one of the books that the ulama recommend, some of the Ahlul Ilm recommend, as a beginner's book to learn from. Okay? Naam. So the email is imam, IMAM, at Croydon, CROYDON, at ICT.com. Okay? No.
Will we still study if stuff is like weak? Will we still like, if it's like a weak hadith? Like,
In terms of hadith and stuff, if it's weak hadith, I'll tell you. The hadith is weak. We'll mention it. Why? Why do we mention weak hadith? So you're aware that the hadith is weak. To know that, okay, I'm not going to act upon this maybe because the hadith is weak. Okay? But, inshallah ta'ala as well, if time permits, we'll discuss the marahil fi talab al-ilm, yani the stages that a person can follow in terms of studying fiqh. Any stages a person can follow in how they can study fiqh, inshallah ta'ala. Even me myself, in terms of trying to bring benefits and explaining this book, I'll be using many sources. So I have an explanation of this book itself, and I have other explanations of books of fiqh that will mention some of the things that are discussed in each chapter. So we'll try to make sure that we can mention them bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now, of the things that we want to mention, is what is fiqh? What is fiqh? Okay, what are we studying? What is fiqh in terms of the meaning and the sources of evidence that are agreed upon, our sources of evidence, and then also some of the terms regarding ahkam, al-shar'i, some of the terms used in relation to al-ahkam al-shar'i. So, in terms of fiqh, it mentions lughatan. Now, what you're going to find when we're studying this book, we're going to say terms like lughatan, i.e. linguistically, the meaning according to the Arabic language. Then you're going to hear us say istilahan. What's the matter of istilahan? In terms of that science. According to the ulama of that science, this is the definition. Okay? What you will learn from this is what we'll see is sometimes one word has many meanings according to different sciences. For example, sunnah. What's the meaning of sunnah?
Said, did, decided,
So ما قال ما فعل ما قرر نعم. So it's the statements, actions, and approvals of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also description of him. That's according to who? According to the people of Hadith, yani according to the Ilm al-Hadith. That's what Sunnah means in Hadith. What does Sunnah mean according to the Arabic language? The way, the tariq. Naam, yes. So what does Sunnah mean according to the people of Fiqh? Recommended. You see, so we're taking one word and it has a number of meanings according to different sciences. And that's what we mean by istilahan. So when you learn the mustalahat, you have what is referred to as like kutub, yani ilm al-wasail, ulum al-wasail. And these are the things that you use to help you understand ilm al-ghaya. So the Arabic language, mustalahat al-hadith, usul al-fiqh, qawaid al-fiqhiyya, these help you understand fiqh, Quran, hadith. These are ilm al-ghaya, the objectives. The ilm al-wasail, these are the tools that allow you to understand those things properly. For example, Arabic language is a miftah, is a key for everything. You need Arabic language to understand the Quran, Sunnah, all of it. But that's why we said at first, you'll find a word, what's the meaning according to the Arabic language? Then according to the science that we're actually studying. It's not a workshop at the masjid, this is a lesson, inshallah, that's going to be starting from next week, every Tuesday at 6 p.m, inshallah. So, this is just an introduction, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So now, we said, according to the lugha, the Arabic language, al-fiqh, bima'na al-fahm. Again, we're not learning it in English, we're learning it in Arabic. What does fiqh mean in Arabic? It means al-fahm. Okay, for us, we don't speak the Arabic language. What does fahm mean? Understanding. Understanding. So al-fiqh bima'na al-fahm, lughatan, according to the Arabic language. Okay, ma ma'na al-fiqh istilahan? What's the meaning of fiqh according to the mustalahat al-ulama al-fiqh, al-fuqaha? We say ma'rifatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-far'iyyah bi-adillatiha. Just understanding, knowing the ahkam al-shar'iyyah, which we'll mention, al-far'iyyah, yani they're not usul, they're furu'. You have usul al-fiqh, which is different. You have far'iyyah, that which is a branch from that. Bi-adillatiha, by way of their evidences. This is what? الفقه معرفة الأحكام الشرعية الفرعية بأدلتها. This is what we mean by الفقه في الإسلام. According to the ulama al-fiqh, the fuqaha. بأدلتها, by way of its evidences. So now, what is considered to be the masadir al-adillah, the evidences, the sources of evidence according to the ulama of fiqh? Now, Quran, Sunnah, before Qiyas is what? Ijma', and then Qiyas. So then we have, for example, Al-Kitab. When we say Al-Kitab, we mean what? Al-Quran. So the first source of evidence is Al-Kitab, the Quran. The second source of evidence is As-Sunnah. As-Sunnah. وهي أقوال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, statements of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, وأفعاله, and his actions, التي يظهر فيها قصد القربة وإقراره, the thing that is clear within those statements and actions, gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also his approvals. So there are things that happened in front of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, and he did not make inkar of it. He didn't show that he disapproved of it. This is what we mean by تقرير ما قرر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The evidence for what we have mentioned is the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ إِن كُنتُمْ تُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. In this Surah An-Nisa, verse 59, it mentions, if you have dispute in anything, then return it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger, i.e. to the Quran and the Sunnah. You use that as your measuring stick. What does the Quran say? What does Allah say about this in the Quran? What is said about this in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What does this teach us? Whenever we are understanding the religion of Islam, the understanding that we have is based upon what? Evidence. Based upon evidence. Someone asked, why isn't the authentic hadith, i.e. hadith al-Quds, considered as primary source of the Quran? Because it's not the Quran, it's from hadith. So it's from the Sunnah also. It's going to be from the Sunnah. And it's going to be from the statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says it on behalf of Allah Azza wa Jal. He says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. So hadith al-Quds is from hadith, from the Sunnah. So now, we also have in Surah Al-Shura, verse number 10, وَمَا اخْتَلَفْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَحُكْمُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Whatever you have disputed in, have difference in, from anything, then the ruling is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of our affairs, we return back to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the primary sources of evidence is the Quran and the Sunnah. في أدلة الشرعية. Then we have الإجماع ويستند إليهما. That's the ijma is depending upon the Quran and the Sunnah. والقياس, ijma is consensus of the ulama. Consensus of the ulama, that which they have all agreed upon. Now, والقياس مستنبط منهما. And qiyas, the analogy, is derived from that also, from the Quran and the Sunnah. And that's when you look at something that is similar to something that has been mentioned before. But it's a contemporary issue, so it hasn't been mentioned at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For example, we know about alcohol being a what? Min musakkirat, the intoxicants. But now you may have a type of drug today that is new. No one knew about this drug before until now. The last 50 years, for example. So how do we understand the ruling of this thing? We look at something that has a similar surah, a similar description of its effects and the likes, to understand what ruling is going to be applied to it. And this is where we use qiyas. You see? And maybe a qiyas of something will become ijma. All of the ulama are in consensus, agreement that this is that. That is the ruling of this, that is haram, musakkir. So it becomes ijma'. Wadih? Now, this is something you may study more in the books of Usul al-Fiqh. As we become more studious, inshallah, and we love that knowledge, we want to learn so we can teach. That's the aim, to teach someone else, to remove ignorance from yourself, and also help remove ignorance from others. We can go into some of these things in more detail, inshallah ta'ala. But it's important that a person learns the Arabic language and strives in doing so. Also, so what is mentioned, al-ijma' is the third source of evidence. وهو اتفاق علماء العصر على أمر من أمور الدين لقوله تعالى ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصله جهنم وساءت مصيرا. So this is the evidence for al-ijma', where it mentions that ijma' is the agreement of the ulama of a particular time on a matter from various matters. And that is because it mentions whoever goes against the messenger after the guidance has come to him, the knowledge has come to him, and follows a path other than the believers, then we will cast him away with that which he has taken on board, وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ, and we will send him to Jahannam, وساءت مسيرة, and a wretched is a destination for that person.
Yeah, sorry.
لا لا بأس, عرفت.
Family, they're waiting.
نعم إن شاء الله. So he will be held responsible for that which he has turned away from, in terms of following other than the path of the believers. The Sabil al-Mu'minin here is referring to ما اتفق عليه, ما اتفقوا عليه وأجمعوا عليه, that which they have agreed upon unanimously. Now, also, we have, for example, al-qiyas, as we mentioned, which is the form of analogy. And that is taking something which is a branch with an asl to compare between them. Are they the same in their effect, in terms of why they would have the same ruling? They would share the same ruling. So that's some of the things mentioned regarding the sources of evidence. When we discuss fiqh, you might hear them say, Al-ulama ajma'u ala tahrim. They are in consensus regarding the prohibition of this thing. So that we know from what they agreed upon that this is something that is haram. Or they are in unanimous agreement that this is something that is halal. And like this and like this. Also, when it comes to qiyas, the qiyas from qiyas is that which is sahih and that which is fasid. So sometimes you find, unfortunately, many of us today, we apply our own qiyas, our own analogy, without having any principle. We do not have any foundations in how to understand and nastanbit al-ahkam, to derive rulings from evidences. So we make our own qiyas. And our analogy becomes fasid. Fasid is that corrupt, void. So that's regarding the sources of adillah, the sources of evidence. Okay. Then we have al-ahkam al-shar'iyya. Al-ahkam al-shar'iyya of two categories. In terms of the categories of ahkam al-shar'i, we have, the first one is al-ahkam al-wad'iyya. Al-ahkam al-wad'iyya, and that is in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making something a sabab, or a cause, or a shart, a condition, or a mani', an obstacle, a prevention. For example, al-hayd tamna' as-salah. Al-hayd min mawani' wujub as-salah. Menses is from the obstacles of obligation of salah. Al-tahara shartun fi sihhat as-salah. Being in a state of purity is a condition for the correctness of the salah. If you pray without tahara, your salah is what? Batila. So these are min haythu ash-shurut wal asbab, like this. And also mawani'. Mawani'. For example, when it comes to applying the laws, the ahkam al-sharia upon individuals, there are sometimes mawani', obstacles. For example, al-junun wal-iskar. That person may have lost their intellect, lost their rational at that time, lost sanity. Person may be sleeping, they may be drunk and the likes. So the rule's not going to be applied to them. Or they have jahl. Sometimes ignorance is an obstacle for application of a certain hukm on a person because they didn't know. Also, sahihan or fasid, when something is sahih and something is fasid. Something being correct and something being incorrect. Assalamu. An example of what we just mentioned regarding zakat. Okay? An example in terms of zakat. إذا وجد النصاب. A nisab is the portion, the amount of money that makes it obligatory upon you to pay zakat. That is a sabab al-wujub. That's the reason for obligation. That's a sabab. Yani, al-nisab, sabab al-wujud. Wujub. That's the reason, the cause behind obligation. Then you have al-hawl. Al-hawl means a year. That's a shart. That's a shart. The shart is that you've had the nisab for 1 year. That's when you pay what? Zakat. Okay? So the nisab is the sabab of obligation. The hawl, 1 year, is the condition in terms of why you pay zakat. فَقَدْ أَوْجَبَتْ أَوْجَبْتُ الزَّكَاةِ. For example, إِذَا وُجِدَ السَّبَبْ لِلْوُجُوبِ وَالشَّرْطِ وُجِبَتِ الزَّكَاةِ. Okay, now, when wujid ad-dayn, if a person has a what? A debt. لم أوجبها لأن الدين من الموانع. So for example, if he has a debt, then now it's not obligatory for him to pay zakat. Why? Because the debt is from the mawani'. It's from the obstacles for him being able to pay zakat. واضح? Is that clear? So again, reaching the nisab, the amount that makes you have to pay zakat, is sabab lil wujub, is a reason for obligation. Wujud al-hawl, the year having gone by, is a shart fil wujub, is a condition of the obligation. So if those two come, that is obligatory to pay zakat. But if a person has a debt, then that is from the mawani' that prevents the obligation. Obstacle. Like a preventative factor, an obstacle. For example, Hajj is wajib, right? Once in a lifetime. If a person has the financial ability to do so, the physical ability to do so, if any of those things are not there, then it's no longer obligation. If you do not have the financial ability, then the obligation is lifted from you. You see? Because if the obligation is not lifted from you, if you don't do it, you're sinful. You are sinful. Just like, for example, if you are praying an obligatory salah, you have to stand up with the what? The qudra. You have the ability. It's a rukn that you stand up. If you don't have the ability to stand up, what do? You sit down. But that's because of a mania. You don't have the physical ability to what? Stand up. So the obligation of standing has been what? Lifted from you. So these are from what is considered to be ahkam al-wad'iyya. But now we have ahkam al-taklifi. Ahkam al-taklifi, this refers to the 5 ahkam regarding the individual. Where if something is what? Wajib, haram, makruh, mustahab, or mubah. So now we look at what do these terms mean. So the first of those terms is al-wajib. Al-wajib. Also what is mentioned, lughatan, from the meanings of wajib, is a-thabit, something that's firm in place. But shar'an, wajib is ma talaba shari' fi'lahu طلبا جازما. It means that which the shari', who is who? Who's the shari'? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shari' is not from the names of Allah. Ash-shari' is not from Allah's names. It's khabarun anhu. It's news about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala huwa shari'. But you never hear someone say Abdul Shari'. That's not from Allah's names. Okay. So here, whatever the shari' has commanded, fi'lahu talaban jaziman, by a binding command. The command is binding, it has to be done.
What does shari' mean?
Shari', the legislator. The one who legislates. The legislator. Hukmuhu, what's his ruling? So you have the definition and you have the ruling. حكم الواجب هو ما أثيب فاعله امتثالا لأمر الله. It's something that the one who does it is rewarded for, because they are complying with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfilling Allah's command. وعوقب تاركه, and the one who leaves it is punished or punishable, because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who's going to be punished, yani hatman laziman, yani for definite. So it's what the one who does it will be rewarded for fulfilling the command of Allah Azza wa Jal. The one who leaves it is under the threat of punishment, may be punished for leaving off something that is an obligation. Second, the opposite of this, which is haram. That which is haram. Lughatan al-mamnu', the prohibited. Something that is prohibited. Shar'an. So sometimes you hear istilahan, sometimes you hear shar'an, according to the sharia. The sharia, the Islamic jurisprudence. So here it mentions حكمه ضده, أي opposite of واجب. أي ضد الواجب. فحكم المحرم ما أثيب تاركه امتثالا ويستحق فاعله من غير ضرورة العقوبة. So look what it mentions here. The ruling of that which is haram is the one who leaves it off is rewarded for fulfilling the command of leaving it off. However, the one who does it without necessity, min ghayri durura, necessity, i.e., they had no choice but they had to do it. For example, you're in the desert and you're thirsty and you're starving. There's no food except for khinzir, except for pork. There's no drink except for khamar. What do?
You eat it and drink it.
You eat that which will suffice you, and you drink that which will suffice you, because they are from the haram, that which is muharramat. But we have a qaida fi qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, a principle that we apply. لا محظورة عند وجود الضرورة. There's no prohibition with the existence of necessity. واضح? So that's why it mentions من غير ضرورة, without being obligated, يعني by necessity. يستحق عقوبة, is deserving of punishment. So the one who does it without necessity is deserving of punishment. Then we have thirdly al-makruh. Al-makruh, which is yani lughatan didd al-mahbub. It's the opposite of that which is liked and loved and desired. Makruh, something that is what? Disliked. And ما طلب الشارع تركه طلبا غير جازم. So it's whatever the shari' has requested or commanded to be left, but the command is not binding. The command is not binding. So with this, With al-makruh, the person who leaves it off is rewarded. The person who leaves it off is rewarded. But the one who does it is not punished. Nor do they deserve punishment. Why? Because it's something that is disliked, it's not that, is it? Which is haram. However, depending on the madhab you're studying, sometimes the word makruh, according to that madhab, means haram. So again, whenever you're studying a certain book, it will tell you within the introduction, the muqaddimah, the intention behind the author when they mention makruh. Because some may intend that which is haram. They may not intend dislike. That when they say makruh, they may mean that it is haram. The fourth is Al-Masnoon. Al-Masnoon taken from Is Sunnah. Al-Masnoon. Or it's also named Al-Mandub. Or Al-Mustahab. You hear all of these three terminologies. Masnoon, Mustahab, or Mandub. What does this mean? The opposite of makruh. i.e. it's recommended to be done. It's recommended to be done. So, with makruh, ما طلب الشارع تركه. يعني طلبا غير جازم. So it's what the shari', Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded to be left, but the command is not binding. That's makruh. As for mustahab or mandub or masnoon, ما طلب الشارع فعله طلبا غير جازم. Again, that which the shari' legislated or commanded to be done, but that command is not binding. That command is not binding. And again with that, a person that does something that is mustahab, they will be rewarded. But if they left it off, they will not be punished, nor are they deserving punishment. Then you have the last one, number 5, and that is Al-Mubah. Al-Mubah, it means Al-Ma'dhun fihi, that which is permitted. That which is permitted. لغة شرعا ما لا يتعلق به أمر ولا نهي لذاته. That which has no command and no prohibition in its essence. أي حكمه فعله وتركه على حد سواء. That which is mubah, leaving it or doing it is the same. It's permitted, لا بأس, no problem. واضح؟
Can you give an example of that?
أصل الأشياء في الدنيا مباح. Things from the worldly matters are mubah. Eating mubah. If you don't eat, you do eat, it's mubah. Unless you start to starve yourself intentionally, then this becomes what? Muharramat. You see? Jogging. Mubah. If you do it, you don't do it, خلاص حد سواء. It's أصل الأشياء في الدنيا إباحة. The things of the worldly life, the asl is what? Ibaha, except for wujud al-adilla fi ghayri dhalik. Except that there is evidence in place to show otherwise. Okay? Well, yeah. So, that is considered to be the ahkam. Yes, someone asked, can you make mubah actions rewardable depending on intentions? That comes from the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. For example, if I go to sleep, but my intention for sleeping is what? To wake up in time for salah, to make sure my body has got enough rest, that when I pray with strength. You'll be rewarded for each time you sleep. If I eat and I drink to give my body nutrition, to be able to fulfill acts of worship in the most strong way, the best way, I'll be rewarded if that is my intention. And that's why they say, Adat al-ulama ibadat. Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions this in his Sharh of Arba'in an-Nawawi. Adat al-ulama ibadat. The customs of the people of knowledge are acts of worship. Why? Because they will get reward for it. وَإِبَادَاتِ الْجُهَلَاءِ عَادَاتِ. And the acts of worship of the ignorant are like customs. They don't get reward because they have no what? Intention. You see? Now,
What's the translation of ahkam?
rules.
Just rules.
Yeah, rules. So now, what is the ruling? ما هو حكم تعلم العلم الشرعي? What's the ruling of this? ما رأيكم? Out of the 5 rules we have mentioned, what is the ruling of تعلم أحكام الشرعي or علم الشرعي? واجب. واجب إلى حد ما. واجب to an extent. واجب to an extent. تعلم أحكام الشرعي is واجب to an extent. Where do we get this from? نعم الحديث طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. Okay, so that which you need for acts of worship is an obligation for you to learn it. So ibadat is an obligation to be learnt. Because ibadat are not accepted except with ikhlas and mutaba'ah. So you have to make sure you understand mutaba'ah, that you're doing this action in the way the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught us to do it. From mu'amalat, if you are a business person, then you need to learn ahkam of bay' wa shira, buying and selling. You see? If a person is going Hajj, they must learn Hajj. They must learn the ahkam of Hajj, so that they can make sure they can perform Hajj correctly. So, depending on this, some things have to be known all the time. Like Aqidah, your belief in Allah, that has to be known always. Some things are learnt at the time they're to be performed. So some actions are continuous, like the salawat is 5 times a day. Hajj is once a year. Siyam is once a year. Zakat once a year. So you learn at the time that is applicable for you to implement it.
So let's say if you're going Hajj, it's like wajib on you to learn them.
Yeah, you wajib, you have to learn Hajj.
Or, okay.
If you're going Hajj, you must learn the ahkam of Hajj.
Oh, okay. Even the things that are like recommended to do in Hajj.
When we say, obviously, we have to learn, with Hajj, you have to learn the obligations of Hajj.
Like the prayer, like just like the pillars.
Everything that you have to do in Hajj, you have to learn it.
Mm.
Things that are Sunnah, it's recommended to learn, because they beautify the act of worship, and you get more reward. But the things that you have to learn is, if you don't do it, your Hajj is invalid. You see? So you have to learn the things that are lazim, that must be learned. So what is mentioned, the one who is baligh and aqil, the one who is at the age of puberty and of sound mind, then it is an obligation for them to learn from fiqh كل ما يحتاج إليه في عباداته. Everything he needs in his acts of worship. Everything he needs in his acts of worship, he must learn. Everything he needs in his acts of worship must be learned. And the hadith that is mentioned, that we just mentioned about طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim, seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. So what is outside of those things that is an obligation for you to learn, then they are from furud al-kifayat, from things that are communal obligations. From the things that are communal obligations. But however, we have the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. هذا الحديث متفق عليه. And whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for them, He grants them understanding of the religion. Grants an understanding of the religion. And that hadith is a clear dalil ala fadilat al-ilm wa fadl al-ilm. It shows clearly the virtue of knowledge. The virtue of knowledge and the people of knowledge. And that's why Allah mentions إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ. Those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most from His servants are the people of knowledge. The people that have knowledge of Allah, the people that have knowledge of Islam, knowledge of the Sharia. They are the ones who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most. So they are what is mentioned, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah قال السلف مجمعون. The Salaf, the pious predecessors, are in unanimous agreement على أن العالم لا يستحق أن يسمى ربانيا. Al-alim al-rabbani is one who is an alim that is senior in knowledge but also cultivates people. So he mentions a person of knowledge cannot be called Rabbani. That's what the Salaf they said. Cannot be considered Rabbani. حتى يعرف الحق, until he knows the truth. ويعمل به, and acts upon it. ويعلمه, and he teaches others it. فمن علم وعمل وعلم فذاك يدعى عظيما في ملكوت السماوات. So whoever does this, learns, acts upon the knowledge, teaches others the knowledge, then that is considered to be something that is great in Malakut al-Samawat, in the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's from Allah azza wa jal. The knowledge that a person has is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the only intention a person should have behind seeking knowledge, ash-shar'i, is to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remove ignorance from themselves, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ala basira wal huda. This is what a person seeks from seeking knowledge. وَنَكْتَفِي بِهَذَا. We will suffice with this inshallah ta'ala. If anyone has any questions, فَلْيَتَفَضَّل. But also this is the book that we'll be studying. As I mentioned, you can purchase it from Amazon. It's about £13 inshallah ta'ala, and it's translated into English. It's the matan, it's just the matan that you'll be required to take notes. So I advise that you get a copy of the book. And mashallah, the book has enough space to write notes in it. It has enough space to write notes within the book, inshallah ta'ala. So I recommend get a highlighter, a few different colors. Also a mechanical pencil, which is a pencil that looks like a pen. I like them a lot. That's my tools. You have to have your tools as a student of knowledge, inshallah ta'ala. So that's the advice from myself to you and myself again as a reminder. Now, الشرعي التكليفي for the response for the one who's responsible for the actions. When something's either an obligation upon you, it's haram for you, or it's like this. No. Zahida.
Zahida, the name of the book.
Kifayatul Zahid. Zahid is one who is abstinent from the dunya. No.
What's the difference between wajib and fard?
This is the mustalahat of a particular madhab. No. In terms of fard and wajib, in general, when we say wajib, it's going to mean fard. Until we see it being used at the same time, then we'll discuss when there's a difference. But sometimes there's a difference in terms of the Hanafi madhab. And in those cases, you have to return back to the books of Usul al-Fiqh. For that madhab specifically, they'll tell you what's the difference between their terminologies that they use in that context, inshallah. Now, move your feet, Ibrahim.
If there's a stronger evidence in one matter, you follow that.
You follow the evidence. You follow the evidence. Now, you follow the evidence. Now, but it's not strong according to you. You see, it's strong according to the ulama. You see? He has a daftar, a notebook. Any other questions? طيب, so as a reminder, when we study the book, inshallah ta'ala, questions that are not related to the lesson. As I mentioned, I'm not a mufti, so I don't want to give fatwa. I'm not going to anyway, but I'm saying those questions, you write them down. If it's a pressing question regarding your acts of worship, you write that question down, I'll take it. If I can get the answer by next lesson, I'll mention in the beginning of the lesson. Questions will only be on the topic we study. If you haven't studied it, you cannot ask it. واضح? Inshallah.
What was the different definition of fiqh?
معرفة الأحكام الشرعية. We have لغة and اصطلاحا. So لغة it was فهم, understanding. شرعا معرفة الأحكام الشرعية الفرعية بأدلتها. So knowing those, knowing the laws of the Shari'iyah that are far'iyah, that are not from the usul, with the evidences. So when we say usul, this is going to be more of usul of fiqh. That's of something else that is recommended to study. Inshallah ta'ala. نعم. طيب. فجزاكم الله خيرا. اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وقت الأذان. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.